Hey everybody, I'm Sam Solomon and this is Signal Tower. Today I'm joined by Fletcher Richman, who's the managing director for Spark Boulder, which is a co-working space and student incubator in Boulder, Colorado. He's also a growth engineer at Pivot Desk and founded Musicfly. Fletcher, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. Good to be here.
So, just to kind of get started, what made you interested in startups?
So yeah, that's a great question. It was around my sophomore year, actually. I had no clue coming to school out in Boulder, really anything about what startups were, that there was a startup scene here. And so around my sophomore year, I really got really just caught up in this idea my friend and I had, which was called the College Life Guide. So we had this idea to make a Yelp for colleges, where you could go and rate dorms and fraternities and sororities and that kind of thing, and then incoming students could see that and get a good idea of the best places to eat and the best frat to be in or whatever it was. I got completely hooked on that concept and ended up reaching out to a couple of different key players here in Boulder and at the university, specifically in the law school, to get free legal help, and ended up kind of just falling into this whole scene of business plan competitions and events, and just getting completely enraptured by this idea that there were people every week, every day almost, holding events where it was like, here's how you start your business, here's what you do step by step by step. I was amazed that it was all just there and available for free. And then that's when I started to teach myself some web design and a couple other tools, and I just got completely obsessed with all of it. Kind of realized that I think the reason that I liked engineering was actually because of entrepreneurship. I just liked the idea of creating things. So I got really, really excited about that whole world.
That's interesting. I guess Boulder is a pretty good city to fall in love with startups with.
Yeah, I got really lucky. I actually came out here for skiing and ended up, that kind of tailed off a little bit. I still love skiing, but grew up in Aspen, so I was really spoiled out there, and came out to Boulder and got really lucky that I ended up in one of the top tech startup cities in the world. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, so you're now the managing director at Spark Boulder, which is awesome. Let's talk a little bit about co-working spaces. For those that don't know or aren't in a city where there's a co-working space, what is the difference between a co-working space or an office, or how is it different?
Yeah, so the kind of simple way in my mind to think about it is kind of like a gym membership. So a co-working space is like a gym, except for in the sense of an office space. So you actually buy a membership to get access to the space, and usually there's different tiers of membership. Kind of the part that I think is really a game changer for co-working is the idea of having a flexible, sometimes it's called a hot desk, sometimes it's called a mobile, whatever it's called. The idea is that you don't necessarily have your own specific desk that's allocated to you. You just buy a membership to a certain area, and then you go sit wherever's open. So it's really a more efficient way to use space, because people are going to be in there at different times of the day, and then you can use it for events, you can move desks around, so it really adds a lot of flexibility to space. Everything's also done on much shorter timescales. So for us specifically, we do month to month. We'll also offer drop-in days, and I even know some co-working spaces that'll do it by the hour. So it's a lot more short-term if you look at that, versus like you have to get a 1, 2, 3 year lease to get office space anywhere else.
I love the gym membership analogy, because when you said that, I think back back to when I was at 1871 in Chicago, and instead of like Pilates and spin classes, there's JavaScript and like design classes. So I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Well, so how did you get involved with Spark?
Yeah. So basically what happened is, after I kind of got involved in the whole startup world and really started to dig myself really deep into it, what I realized were a couple of things. And the big one was that Boulder is unique in the sense that the university is actually not extremely well connected to the startup community. So I say it's unique because I think if you look at other startup communities, such as Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, they all have kind of a really, really strong private university that's directly connected to them. We have Stanford, MIT, NYU, a lot of these great feeder schools that basically the startup community was built around them. Whereas in Boulder, it was a lot more about places like Techstars, Foundry Group, some of these other organizations and programs that actually brought a lot of the talent and a lot of the energy to Boulder in the last 10 years. And the school, being a public university and just not being the center of all of this activity, has really gotten left behind. And so there's this gap, and we call it the Boulder Creek Divide, because the Boulder Creek runs right in between the university and Pearl Street, which is where all the startups are. And it's crazy. I mean, 95% of students don't even know that the whole startup community exists, that they live in the back door of one of the top startup communities in the world. And so I noticed that problem, and I kind of played in I helped with internships and started to get really understanding that problem and why it existed and why it was such a big deal. And then I was at the time also working with the on-campus entrepreneurship center, who was trying to find a space, because everyone knew there needed to be a space for student entrepreneurs to work, and no one had just really done it. It was kind of another known problem that no one had fixed, because everything is very fragmented at the school. It's engineering school does their thing, the business school does their thing, and it's all very fragmented. And so in the fall of 2012, I was shown an empty basement space about a block from the school. It's 5,400 square feet, absolutely perfect, and hadn't been leased in like 5 years. So it could be negotiated down to a really good price. Spent about a semester trying to get the school to really get on board with it, and didn't have a lot of luck. CU has kind of a notorious, they're known for not jumping on top of things like this and waiting till they're successful and then jumping on board. And so ended up partnering with a local law firm who was really excited about being involved in an incubator because it's great lead generation for them. So they helped us kind of get the initial documents and everything set up. And then we actually went out and raised a bunch of money from the community because of that divide that I noticed. The community was really willing to say, we want there to be a bridge between these two communities. We want you to create this central unit to bring together all the students and all the talent, and we'll just get access to it. And you'll feed them down into the community. And so we were able to raise about $140,000 from individuals, from businesses, basically put together a promotional package for them. And they were absolutely incredible in the support they gave. I was sending cold emails out and getting checks back from CEOs of companies that were like, yes, this is great. I really want to help out. I want to be involved. And that's how we kind of raised our startup capital. And then that allowed us to do the construction of this empty 5,400 square foot space and give it four offices, 2 conference rooms, 10 desks, a big event space, kitchen, bathrooms, kind of all this different stuff, and go through that whole process as well.
That's interesting. A few things. It's amazing that, that I guess students that are in school there weren't really aware of the entrepreneur. I mean, because I think back to when I was in Auburn. When I was in Auburn, it actually took till after my business failed for me to like search out and find like where these places were, and it kind of in that search for what went wrong, I discovered a startup community, but it wasn't in Auburn. It was somewhere on the internet.
Right.
So that's interesting. Also, one of the things that I think is cool is, so, instead of, you kind of went out and saw that there was this divide where there should be this community, in kind of a very startup way, went and got buy-in from the rest of the community to go do it. So, I think that's awesome. So since Spark opened its doors, what's it been like there?
It's been pretty amazing. It wasn't just like me solo doing it. It was myself and 2 other students at the time all of us have since graduated now, but we're kind of the initial little group that got excited about it. We got that law firm on board, and then we started getting this really awesome core group of students who drove it forward. A student did all the architecture work for us, which was awesome. We had a student do all the branding and design. We had right before we opened, we had about 20 days where we ran out of money basically for construction, and we had basically, to save our budget, said we'll do the painting and staining ourselves. We're like, yeah, it'll be easy. It's just to look like just some paint. We'll throw it on the walls. We'll stain the wood. Like it's no big deal. And I mean, a commercial staining and painting project is a big deal. So we spent a good 20 days, but we had probably like over the course of those 3 weeks, 50 different students come in and help just on a volunteer basis. We'd all just come in, drink some beer, hang out, and just stain the roof of this place. And so I think the key for us was we built that community before we even opened. We really had a lot of buy-in, not just from all the companies that had donated, but from all the students that were really the key players. Because everyone, there's like this core group, like I said, 95% of people don't know about the community, but that 5%, there's this core group of 50 to 100 students that are really, really excited about the startup world. And we had buy-in from all of them in the form of literal labor. And so the day we opened, we had like this huge event, 300 and something people, all our supporters, and gave out gifts to everybody. And just, it was this amazing, amazing energy. And then we had an entire actually computer science class where they taught students out of the university that's called Startup Essentials of Computer Science. They teach them how to start a business. We had Watson University, which is a social impact university based in Boulder, that they had their classes there twice a week, and this community and this group that had built up from before we'd even opened. So we didn't have the cold start problem that I think some co-working spaces run into. We opened with 70 people or 65 people that were really excited about it, and we ended up growing from that kind of core group up to about 110 in the first semester, which, considering we opened halfway through the semester and considering the fact that we were actually making students pay, which no one thought they would do, and we weren't even really sure that they would do, it was absolutely awesome. And I think we ended up having, like, every event we talked about, we're going to help students with internships. We had a big internship fair. We're going to help create more student companies. We had a startup weekend there in March. We did all sorts of different events, and I think we had almost 2,000 attendees just in like 2.5 months. So it really turned out, I think, above and beyond everyone else's expectations in terms of the community, the people, and kind of the scale of what happened so far. So
for those events, are you reaching out to people? Are people or someone at Spark reaching out to people? Are they volunteering? Is that attracting people from the school, or are more students now getting, or more and more students getting involved?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. It's a combination of all those. One of the big things with Spark, and that was, I think, unique to what we were doing, is that we weren't trying to create our own programming. We knew that there was so much already going on at the school that we just needed to build a central hub to attract it all. So a lot of these events were already happening. There was already an internship fair called Startups to Students that happened every year, but it just happened in a random building on campus. So we gave it a much more fitting venue. And there was already, I think there's probably 10 major clubs that are related to entrepreneurship in some way. And we gave them all a centralized space and a home for all their events. So we hosted most of them for free just because it was great publicity for us and a great way to get, like you said, a lot of faces in the door that don't know anything about this stuff. And the great part too is that we're right in the middle of student life on what's called the Hill in Boulder, which is right where all the really cheap food is. It's where all the students live. And so we're able to bring in people that are just walking by that wouldn't normally get engaged, which is one of the big goals, is just awareness. That 95% problem is a big thing that we're really trying to solve. And I think we did get a lot of people in there that normally would not have any idea about any of this stuff. So that was really exciting and really cool.
Well, so now what's your day-to-day like? What does it look like working at Spark?
Yeah, so it's a little different than it was over the school year, obviously. So the school year was, we kind of found a little interesting in terms of differences from other co-working spaces. Students are much more of late night co-working space people. So we moved our hours from regular 9 to 5 to 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. So we have much later hours. We have we're open on the weekends. there'd be a bunch of nights. It's really cool. There's this like core group of 10 people who would be there 12:30 a.m. on a weeknight, just cranking, just this awesome productive vibe. And so that was kind of the school year vibe. And I think that's only going to amplify come this fall when we'll kind of just relaunch and really we've got 6,000 new potential customers walking in the door as freshmen, and we can really kind of engage from there. But this summer, we've actually got a totally different vibe. So we've got 2 full-scale accelerator programs happening in the space. One of them is called the Unreasonable Institute, and that's a social impact accelerator that's been around for 4 years now. And they live actually in a frat house. They rent out a whole frat house and all live in there. And they used to do their workshops in the basement of a frat house. And so they're super excited to be based in a real workspace now. And we were able to work out a really good deal. It's like 2 blocks from us is where they live. So it just made perfect sense. And then we've also got a program called Catalyze CU, which is actually a pilot of a university accelerator that the engineering school at CU is running. So we're giving 6 teams, and the teams are getting $4,000 grants from the university, so they're not taking any equity. And the teams get free space, a bunch of mentorship, with the idea being to really take student teams to the next level. So that's pretty cool because it's just a big step for CU, and the fact that we're housing kind of the next steps, and really I think CU has passed a tipping point where it's really now going to start to cascade and see a lot of entrepreneurial activity and growth, and hopefully start to match the level that Boulder is at.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and as you see, like more and more students get involved, they'll bring their friends and things like that. That's great. Well, let's kind of take a break here. Before we were talking, you gave a speech called "Failure is Fantastic," right? Or a talk called "Failure is Fantastic." If you would tell us a little about some of your failures.
Yeah, sure. So that first company that I started talking about was called the College Life Guide, which was my first little foray into the startup world. And what happened is, so I taught myself, I actually did Drupal. I don't know if you're familiar with Drupal at all, but
yeah.
I used Drupal. For some reason, decided that was the best CMS around at the time. It worked all right. I got what I wanted, the rating systems and all that stuff set up. And then what I did, the big kind of, I think, mistake that I made with this is I basically just pulled my friends in and said, hey, do you want to be a part of this? And kind of just convince them into it and force them to come to weekly meetings. Didn't really have buy-in from everyone on the team. Just kind of they were doing it because they were my friends and they wanted to support what I was doing. And so that kind of, it just died because I didn't have the right team around me. I don't know that it necessarily was a bad idea. I mean, I still think it's probably pretty solid if anyone ever really wanted to pick it up. I think I also I wasn't passionate about ratings and rankings for fraternities and sororities and that kind of thing. It was just what I was really in the middle of as a sophomore in college, and so it made sense to me at the time. But over the course of, I think it probably lasted like 6 months, I really just lost a lot of my passion for it, which is obviously key when you're not getting paid and you're not making money, and it's always difficult, right? So I think it was a passion thing there. That one kind of shifted and morphed around a little before fizzling out. The next one was a company called Musicfly. And so this one, it's kind of cool because in the talk again, I talked about how each time I kind of got a little further than the time before, with Spark being the one that actually got over the edge to the point of launching and making money and actually breaking even. So Musicfly was kind of the middle guy between the College Life Guide and Spark. And this time I did a much better job of identifying a problem. What I did is I found that I had a bunch of friends who were pretty good musicians, kind of like electronic, mostly stuff is mostly what we have in Boulder, but who had no clue how to get their music from sharing to their friends to actually getting it to a bigger audience. So they would basically just send out like 30 to 50 to 100 cold emails to music bloggers out of a spreadsheet and just say, hey, here's my song, please post it. And none of them would have any success with it. And so I talked to some of the music blogs, and you would be absolutely amazed with how inundated music bloggers get.
I'm
Tiny little
sure.
music blogs get blasted, hundreds and thousands of emails by all these desperate artists basically trying to get in front of them. And so what we said is, okay, let's build a smarter system for this because email is just not the right way to send music between artists and blogs. And so this time I built a much better team. It was me and three other computer science students, one other kind of business guy, and we really put together a nice product. We had traction. We got a bunch of blogs signed up first, and once we had the blog signed up, the artists will do anything and everything to get in front of the bloggers. So I think we ended up with a few thousand users and like 20,000 songs that passed through our system, and really like started to do really well. And a couple of things happened. I mean, in the end, one of the big reasons for the failure was we couldn't find a way to make money. We were in a terrible, terrible space to make money. Both of our customers are broke. We're in the music space, so no one's gonna fund you. No, like it was just not the ideal space to be in. And what I've realized is you only have as far as I can see, you only have kind of three strikes. Three strikes is too much, right? And the first strike against you is that you're an inexperienced entrepreneur. So if you've had an exit or something, you don't have that strike, but most of us still have that strike. The second strike against you is that you're doing a startup. That's really, really hard. And so don't give yourself a third strike. Being in the music space is the third strike that just kind of kills you. Being in the social impact space, in my opinion, as an inexperienced entrepreneur is a third strike that'll kill you. I could go as far as saying being a consumer-facing app or consumer-facing anything is a pretty big challenge at this point in general. I'm not going to quite go that far, but the point is that I had too much stacked up against me in that case, and really, yeah, we didn't find a revenue model, but we just lost momentum. And so I think that's a big thing that's not talked about that much is we pivoted and shifted our revenue model so many times that it got to the point where everyone just kind of lost their motivation, and it was a momentum thing. We just kept switching and moving, and we weren't seeing that increasing growth, and so the momentum kind of died. That's still up and running. The site is still going, and we still get people signing up all the time, which is kind of funny, but we don't really touch it at all. And it actually kind of turned into a consulting firm. We've been doing some consulting work that's kind of spun out of that just because it kind of showed we're a great dev team that can build cool stuff. So it was a failure as a startup, but I think a success. All of them were total successes in terms of learning because I was able to go now with Spark and build a great team, not lose momentum, really identify a real pain point and a problem, and do a lot of these things that I totally messed up in the beginning. So
That's interesting. So obviously, initially there was with the first company, there was a lot of stuff wrong. With the second company, you identified a problem, couldn't necessarily find a way to make money, lost momentum, and then you built an awesome team, and which you did with Musicfly too. But then basically you had all the things go right with Spark. You put a lot of emphasis on building teams. What makes a good team, and how do you build better teams?
yeah, so a lot of it's really fuzzy, and I think deep down a lot of the time whether or not you're building a great team. I think some of the best ways to look at it are looking at your strengths and really identifying, being really honest, it's a really hard thing to do, and looking at what do I not do well. So like, for example, I know that I'm not a good creative design person, and so a big part of Spark's success is one, being a well-designed space, two, having a really nicely well-designed brand. There's not really a lot of engineering that my expertise is more in implementation and engineering, and there's really not that much that needed to happen. This is a pretty well-defined, we're building a workspace, it just needs to function really, and it's more about the brand and the design. And so I knew that was a really big weakness, and so that's why we brought in my friend Jamie, who I just knew very well, as kind of he built the brand, he came up with the name, did all that. And then Stephanie, who was the architect, who really did everything around the space design, the interior design, the vision for how it would look and how it would feel. And then, I mean, I guess, yeah, my strength in this case was fundraising, which wasn't really something I'd done before, but it just was something I was able to do fairly well. And then we had like a law firm, right? If you have a bunch of legal issues, which you do when you're doing a lease on a workspace and a nonprofit and all these different things, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know. So I think it's more about um, identifying strengths and weaknesses. And then I think a big part of it too, like I said, is just going with your gut. You know who the smart and who the talented people are around you. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, I can't get that really smart, that kid I know that's a genius, I can't get him to work with me. If that's the case, then either you're working on the wrong thing or you're just not pitching it correctly, or you're not, you need to believe in what you're doing enough that you should be able to get all the most talented people around you. And I think everyone has a group of really talented people within their network that they should be able to attract to whatever they're doing.
So now I've got to ask you, why is failure fantastic?
I think it's a title, first of all. I think the summary of the talk is you don't have to have failure to get to success, but it's a really good stepping stone on the way to success. Like I said, those lessons I learned from the previous companies that I worked on or that I failed at really helped me when it came to the next step and doing things right with Spark. And it also gave me, I think, a lot of the network and the credibility that I needed. So although, like I said, they were failures, they taught me and helped me so much because I became known as someone who gets stuff done. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of people miss too, is that failure especially in the startup world, and I'm seeing it more and more in the rest of the business world as well, isn't seen as a bad thing. People would much rather hire someone who's failed twice than someone who has had zero experience whatsoever, or much rather put their trust and their faith in that person who's had multiple failures, which is, it's counterintuitive to a lot of people. And so I think that driving that into people more and more and more, because it's totally true. I have way more faith, as weird as it sounds, in someone who's failed a bunch of times than someone who has just never tried, right? So I think that's why failure is fantastic.
That's a great answer. Well, let's talk a little bit about Pivot Desk, which is a startup that basically it helps people find kind of like co-working spaces and places to work. How did you get involved with them?
Yeah, so that's another, I think, fun story in terms of it was total luck, and I think that's something I haven't talked about too at all in terms of all this stuff. Is a big portion of it ends up being luck as well. So you can set yourself up for failure or success as much as you want, but a lot of it's luck. So I was just at a meetup. They were pitching at a meetup towards the end of Techstars in 2012 because they were going through Techstars at the time. I was on my new little Google tablet when those had just come out, and the Nexus 7, I think, and their site on that size tablet just looked like crap. And so I emailed them and I was like, hey guys, just want to let you know, here's a screenshot, your site looks terrible on tablets. And they ended up, just kind of by luck, giving me an interview through that. At the time, I was just starting to teach myself Ruby on Rails. And so they actually sent me off to a couple other people who they thought was better because I did electrical engineering. And then 3 weeks later, got an email from Kelly, one of the co-founders, and he's like, hey, come into the office. And I go in all starstruck, walking through the Techstars office, and he's like, cool, so you start tomorrow. Here's what we're working on right now. I'm like, what? What's going on? Okay, cool. And ended up working out great. I kind of had to teach myself Rails on the fly, which is probably the best way to do it. Teach myself Git and GitHub and all that stuff, and did that. They kind of eased me into it, started building some small little projects for them, and then ended up kind of running their whole intern team last summer to pilot this like inside sales email hacker project. Have continued to work with them over the past it's been almost 2 years now, and actually just started full-time here today. So
congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah. Super exciting, really, really fun company. and yeah, we just launched in 29 or 23 new cities, so we're in 29 markets now across the U.S. And it's actually interesting. It's a bit of a unique challenge that I have with Spark and Pivot Desk is that I have people associate me with co-working a lot, and Pivot Desk is, although there's a few co-working spaces on Pivot Desk, we're really kind of the next step, right? So after you do co-working, you use Pivot Desk to get your own office, and you get a little bit too much space in your office because you're going to grow into it and use Pivot Desk to monetize that space. Or you're a smaller company that just wants, because it's co-working at some point gets to the point where you need your own spot, you need your own space.
Right.
And so it's really that next tier. But what's interesting is Spark actually uses Pivot Desk for our payments. So Pivot Desk was kind of one of our sponsors, gave us a discount on their payment processing system, which for co-working actually works really well, right? It's a month-to-month system. They take a deposit. They kind of handle all that stuff for us. So we have, like I said, 110 members. I'm not going to get checks or swipe cards for 90 students for $30 every month. There's no way. So they all actually sign up and do their whole transaction through Pivot Desk. Which has been really cool for me working at the company and being a customer of the company at the same time and helping them understand and build how can Pivot Desk work as a payment system for a co-working space. So that's been a really cool symbiotic relationship, and I think that's something I try and do in general with everything I do is how can I mash together the two things I'm working on, because then you end up being much more efficient with I'm at Spark, but I'm technically still working on Pivot Desk stuff because I'm right now dealing with a customer at Spark and getting insight on why the Pivot Desk system is or is not working. So I have kind of that, you get dual time for everything that you do, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, well, I guess I understand why people obviously kind of associate you with co-working spaces and whatnot, but looking at Pivot Desk and Spark, what do you think makes those spaces successful? What will make Spark successful, or what will make a small company leasing a few extra desks in their space successful?
Yeah, so I think I've touched on it a little too. I've put a lot of emphasis on team, and it's the same thing. It's the people. So I think you probably noticed I put a lot of emphasis on the initial community we built at Spark, and that really attributing that to the success that we had. It's all about the people in the space and the people and the community that you're building. Whatever else you provide is great. You have to have Wi-Fi. You've got to have desks and chairs and amenities. And it's great if you have free coffee and we offer mentorship and all. There's add-ons that you can have. But in the end, what people really buy is they buy into the community and they buy into working, especially with co-working, around the people that are members of the space. Because it's all about, for some students, it's about finding teammates. For other students, it's about really, it's an inspirational thing of when you're looking across the room and you see it's 11:30 at night and I really want to leave, but I look over and in the office, there's 3 guys just cranking right now, just crushing it, like so focused, so intense, and that gives you the motivation to work another hour and really, okay, I guess I can finish up this pitch deck or whatever it is. And I think that's similar as well with Pivot Desk, is really being surrounded. I mean, we're matching startups with startups, and so we're putting together that energy, and there's something about having one more business in your space or 2 or 3 that it provides that next level of energy. And we've really seen that. I mean, we've seen partnerships happen and investments happen and all this stuff happen because of the shared communities that we're creating. And I think it's providing a tiny piece of the value you see in accelerators or other programs as well. It's just when you're side by side with an awesome startup, you're just motivated. You want to get a lot more done and you want to really do great. So it comes down to the people in the end.
Definitely. Well, earlier you were talking about learning Rails and stuff, and I thought of a few other questions kind of in the meantime.
Yeah.
For someone who, say someone doesn't know any languages, or maybe they're just a front end, well, no, they don't know any languages. How, you said earlier you chose Drupal for your first company. How did you arrive at that decision? And I guess how should people figure out if they're going to learn a language, what they need to learn?
Yeah, so I think I have a bit of an unfair advantage over some people in that my generation has become extremely Google prone. So I have it really it's a mindset. Every question that I have, it's not like, oh, I better call my mom and figure out like today what health insurance plan I should take or something like that. It's like I should Google it. That's my first instinct reaction is like, oh, we can't figure out this, and this. Google it. Like everything. I've just gotten to the point where that's set into my mind. And so when I'm sitting there figuring out, like trying to figure out what should I use to build this website, the College Life Guide that I'm thinking about, I was reading a ton of articles about what's the best content management system. Why, and I don't remember how, I think a friend recommended to me content management systems, and then I read like 10 articles, why Joomla versus WordPress versus Drupal, and why you should do each one, and what capabilities there are, and I just read a lot. So Google is your best friend is the short answer, and I don't know if you would agree, but I think that stays true throughout the entire time as a developer. Stack Overflow, obviously, but Google is how you get there. And I think the common joke is if Google went down for a day, that there would be a lot less actually qualified developers in the world for that day.
I haven't heard that, but I like it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few of those guys who like wrote Rails or wrote JavaScript or whatever who would be fine, but all the rest of us would be totally screwed. So yeah, Google's your best friend. Quora is amazing. I mean, there's a lot of really amazing resources. And then obviously more specifically, if you get into Rails or one of those specific languages, there's entire free online books. Coding in general is a pretty incredible opportunity just in terms of the fact that you can learn everything for free online at this point, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. Well, and speaking of those books, and as someone who is a novice Rails developer, I've done the Hardle tutorial a couple times. Yep. What are some of those others that are resources that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on your learning style. I definitely recommend the Hardle tutorial to everybody. And then there's Rails for Zombies on Code School is a fun little one that's a little bit more interactive. And Code School has some deeper ones now as well, but the Rails for Zombies one is free at least, which is why it's an easy one to recommend. And then I think, honestly, beyond that, I really think you have to build your own thing. Once you get past the Hardle tutorial and like Ruby on Code Academy and maybe a couple other little things, my style, the way that I learn best is to just build something. So go to a couple good like ideas, go to a hackathon, join a team with a really experienced developer and just sit next to him and do what you can, but really learn from that person, because watching somebody else and really seeing the way that they set up the infrastructure for Rails specifically, or for anything, is really useful. So go to those, show up, get involved, like hang out for those. There's a lot of cool meetups and stuff too that you can go to in Boulder, at least. I don't know about other places, but there's a lot of cool that kind of thing. And just in general, once you start getting really into your own project, then you can have more specific questions that once again you can Google. How do I go about setting up this, and this? Why should I use Devise for my user authentication versus something else, right? So build your own thing after you get through a couple of those early tutorials.
Great. Well, I've got just a kind of a few last questions generally that I ask. Who do you look up to?
Good question. It's actually interesting. I tell a lot of people the way that I've since I've gotten into the entrepreneurial community, the way that I've tried to structure my path and my life is I find people who I really respect and whose life is kind of what I want my life to be like when I'm their age. And then I just basically do whatever they tell me to do. Because like everyone has a blog, everyone has a like whole thing that you can read about. Here's my advice. Here's what I would recommend. And so I think it's really important as a young entrepreneur to pick a few key figureheads or people who you really respect, who you can kind of follow. Specifically for me, there's a couple people. One of them is this guy named Brad Bernthal, he's the director of the Silicon Flatirons Entrepreneurship Program at the university, and just does an amazing job, amazing connector, amazingly kind of just his demeanor, I guess, is really what I try and slowly work my way to get towards because he's so good at respecting everybody and at making connections and doing all that stuff. And then one other guy, they're actually both lawyers, which is weird. I don't know if that means I should go to law school or not. Um, his name's Jason Mendelson. He's one of the managing directors at Foundry Group. And him and Brad actually co-taught a class that I audited called VC 360. It was a 360 view of venture capital because Jason wrote the book on venture capital, basically.
That's awesome.
Him and Brad, and so that book's really, really good. And they walk through that book basically and go way, way deeper on a lot of the topics. So that was my favorite class as an undergrad, and I was auditing it because it was a graduate law class. So I didn't actually get credit for it, but it was an amazing class. So those two guys are definitely the first two top of mind for me in terms of people that I really respect and look up to. So.
Well, and the last question is, I know you provided a ton of awesome advice here, but for someone looking to start their first business, to start their first company, is there one thing that that's more important than anything else?
Yeah, I think I said it briefly, but I just reiterate it, is don't be afraid of failing. I think whether or not people realize that it's the thing that's holding them back, that holds a lot of people back from actually starting. They'll just continue to talk. And so in combination with don't be afraid of failing, what that means is actually do it. So you'd be amazed. This was a part of kind of the whole talk I gave. You'd be amazed at how much it puts you above the crowd by just doing. People really respect when you're like, yeah, I'm going to build this, and then you build it. Even if it looks like crap, even if you built it in Drupal and you don't know any CSS and like it barely works, people still respect the heck out of you for actually going and building it. And over time, it'll get better and better and better. So I think that's one of the reasons that the whole like lean startup and all those movements have had such good success is not necessarily because putting out a crappy product makes you learn a lot about your customer and makes you like do a lot of these other things. It's really just because it forces you to actually build a product, and it gives you a scope that you feel like you can handle, where it's like, I've brought my whole company down into just, this is all I need to create. If I can create that, then I can take the next step forward. And I don't really think that you're an entrepreneur until you do that. So I think that it's the big defining differentiator between the entrepreneurs and the actual entrepreneurs is these guys don't actually, they just talk. They don't actually do anything. And I think it's failure that they're scared of. I think it's mostly failure. So don't be afraid, go do it.
Definitely. Well, Fletcher, this has been a great conversation. Where can people find you?
Couple places. I think Twitter is probably the fastest in terms of, I get that on my phone. So if you have questions and stuff, it's at Fletcher Richman. LinkedIn is cool too. I like using that for just like generally knowing where my network is. It's like the location stuff is kind of interesting, and that's a nice way to do things too. So those are two good spots. I also have the domain fletcher.io, so that's pretty cool. You can find all my social links on there too. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.